Hey everyone, and welcome to the first episode of The Artist Project, the series where I review musical artists for you. For each video, I'll give a summary of their career, share my experience listening to their music, and finally leave you with recommendations of what I think everybody should listen to. Today's episode is about Bob Dylan, who Rolling Stone claims is the #1 songwriter of all time. Let's get into it. Bob Dylan was born on May 24th, 1941 in Duluth, Minnesota. He released his first album, self-titled Bob Dylan, in 1962 and has released multiple albums in 2023, which spans more than a 60-year musical career. His first album was almost entirely folk covers, including songs like Man of Constant Sorrow and House of the Rising Sun, which are just some common Americana classics. One of his originals on the album, though, was Song to Woody, which is a tribute to Woody Guthrie, who at the time was one of the most prominent folk singers. You might be thinking, what's Woody Guthrie known for?
This land is your land, and this land is my land.
That's who Bob Dylan looked up to. Do you understand that? Do you want to know who looks up to Bob Dylan? He looked up to Woody Guthrie. Who looks up to Bob Dylan? Alright, well, let's start off with the Beatles. When the Beatles met Bob Dylan in 1964, this interaction, though it may have a bit of a murky history, may be one of the most influential meetups in music history. Bob Dylan thought that the Beatles were potheads, and he allegedly gave them marijuana. But this moment kind of changed things. They loved the experience, it was hilarious, and it got them into harder and harder drugs, which basically defined the second half of the Beatles' career. If you look at how their music changed from 1964 and beyond, it's pretty clear that drugs played a role in that music. Just go listen to Revolver and tell me that they're not on drugs. The Beatles also allegedly got Bob Dylan inspired to play electric music. This was a big deal. Bob Dylan, for those first few years of his career, was seen as an icon of folk music, staying true to acoustic sound and writing incredible lyrics. Then after meeting with the Beatles, Bob Dylan completely changed his sound. This wouldn't be the only time he does it in his career, but it was the first time. Bob Dylan's new electric sound made a lot of fans run away. But the music that came after is some of the most influential folk rock of all time. If we really think about it, this interaction led to some of the foundational music for psychedelic rock and folk rock. I told you this history wouldn't be comprehensive, but I never said it wouldn't be interesting. Do you know who else was inspired by Dylan? Let's look at a few. Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. After touring with Dylan, they completely changed their level of musicality. Johnny Cash covered a bunch of Dylan songs. The Byrds covered a bunch of his music, including Mr. Tambourine Man, which is one of their most famous songs as well. Have you ever heard of All Along the Watchtower by Jimi Hendrix? Yeah, that's a Bob Dylan song, covered by Jimi Hendrix. He wrote that. Do you understand? Bob Dylan inspired Jimi Hendrix. Now let's bring it up to this century. In a 2013 interview with Complex, Mac Miller cited in his list of top 25 albums the Freewheelin Bob Dylan as #1. Talk about influencing hip-hop. Mac Miller is known as one of the most influential rappers of the 2010s. I Be High by Kid Cudi, that sample, Lay Lady Lay from Dylan's 1969 album Nashville Skyline. My point is, Bob Dylan didn't just change folk music, he changed music as a whole forever. His influence on psychedelic rock, folk rock, and even modern hip hop is monumental. That's why I care about Bob Dylan's music, and that's why you should too. So let's get into it, my experience listening to Bob Dylan. Now, I'm not going to explain why I started listening to Bob Dylan. If you want to know why, you can click on the video that explains why I started this project, which also explains why I chose Bob Dylan first. My experience listening to Bob Dylan. Honestly, his first album, I wasn't super amazed by. His second album, the Freewheelin Bob Dylan, it was incredible. Listening to that, that's when I knew I was hooked. It was incredible to see him go from the Freewheelin Bob Dylan to when he plugged in the amp on Bringing It All Back Home and Highway 61 Revisited. From there, I got to see as Bob Dylan's sound shifted again to country music with Nashville Skyline and John Wesley Harding. He inspired yet another genre, country rock. I was really impacted as I listened to Bob Dylan talk about his divorces and tensions in his relationships, with 1975's Blood on the Tracks followed by 1976's Desire. You can see him attack the topic again in 1997's Time Out of Mind. This album shoots deep into Dylan's soul, and I was impacted heavily by the music as he talks about yet another divorce and the pain it brought him. I'm not gonna lie, it was a lot of music to listen to, and the experience took a long time. It took me almost 5 months to listen to all of it, and I didn't even listen to every single album. I actually stopped after Time Out of Mind, and so I have quite a bit to keep going on. But I think it's going to be a while before we jump back into it. I listened from August to December of 2022, but I can tell you that Bob Dylan's actually been my top artist on Apple Music Replay for 2022 and now 2023. Pretty impressive stuff. So now that I've gone through listening to all of this music, I can give my recommendations on what I think you should listen to so you don't have to do the same thing. Of the 29 studio albums I listened to, I'll give you a rundown on my top 10, which really were the only 10 that stood out to me more than the others. At the end of this video, I'll have some playlists and other recommendations to share with you, but for now, let's go through my top 10 albums of Bob Dylan's. Coming in at number 1, the Freewheelin Bob Dylan. I don't think initially it was this way, but in the last year and a half, it's really become my favorite album. This album was revolutionary. From Blowin' in the Wind, Don't Think Twice, It's Alright, and Girl from the North Country, I think these are some of the most incredible acoustic folk songs of all time. Number 2 is Bringing It All Back Home, which was Bob Dylan's first electric album. I was so impressed by She Belongs to Me, Love Minus Zero / No Limit, Mr. Tambourine Man. What an incredible album. Number 3 is Blood on the Tracks. This album goes into the depths of relationships and the ups and downs that you experience along the way. Songs like Shelter from the Storm and Tangled Up in Blue really show the potential he had. After those top 3, go as follows. Number 4, Blonde on Blonde. Number 5, Desire. Number 6, Highway 61 Revisited. Number 7, Time Out of Mind. Number 8, Oh Mercy. Number 9, Street Legal. And number 10, Good As I've Been to You. I would get the vinyl record of those top 6 albums. As I go through this project, I hope to be collecting vinyls. For each of these episodes, I'll make sure to link below an Apple Music and Spotify playlist of my favorites for each artist. As I went through with Bob Dylan, any song that stood out to me in the slightest, I added to a playlist. That playlist is huge, and it honestly goes a little bit in too much depth, so I actually made a second playlist as I went along called Dylan 2, For the People. It's more of like my greatest hits and is a little more concise than that first playlist I was making. I'll make sure to put that list below of those top albums that I would recommend to you as well. Seriously, go listen to the Freewheelin Bob Dylan. If you liked this video, make sure to click that like button, hit subscribe, and turn on that notification bell. If you have any suggestions of artists you think I should dive into, make sure to comment below as well. The list is already long, but if you have a really good recommendation, I'll make sure to add it to the list. Join me in 2 weeks where I'll be discussing why Jimi Hendrix is the most influential guitar player of all time. If you've made it this far in the video, like I said, thanks again. My name is Paul Collins, and this is The Artist Project. See you next time.